So I guess I'm going to hop on the card review train. We're going to start with the class cards and then finish off with the neutral cards, and I'm going to give every card a star rating, 1 to 5, because I learned from Trump that giving something either a 1 star or a 5 star makes for good memes if you end up being really wrong. So let's go for a star rating system. For me, a 1 star is going to be a card that I really don't see ever having any potential, unless some like really specific synergy card is printed with it in a new set. A 2-star card is a card that I think is pretty bad, but I can kind of see like the fringe application of the card, or maybe it would be pretty easy for Blizzard to print another card to go along with it in a future set that would drastically increase its power level or something. Basically, I believe that 1 and 2-star cards are pretty much just going to suck. 3-star cards are okay. They might just barely make the cut in some decks, might just barely not make the cut in some other decks. They might have some interesting synergies, but their archetypes don't really take off. But all in all, they're not terrible, they probably won't be meta-defining. And even at 3 stars, most of the cards probably won't see much play. 4 and 5-star cards I expect to see a lot of play. 4-star cards are probably going to slot into competitive decks, or they might be deck-defining for some lower tier decks. And 5-star cards are going to be played in like every deck of that class, or they're going to be really important in a tier 1 deck or something like that. That's kind of how I'm rating things. So when I call something 5-star and it ends up being a dumpster tier card, you can make fun of me. Or same when I rate a 1-star card that ends up being broken. So anyway, starting with Druid. It seems like Druid is getting some like taunt synergies. They've got some little spiders and shit. Some of their stuff has poisonous. So taunts and tokens with some poison, I guess. Crypt Lord. It seems like it might do kind of a similar thing to Tar Creeper if you wanted to play it in Token Druid, but I kind of suspect Tar Creeper is probably just better. Crypt Lord can keep getting health, and it's pretty easy for that deck to play several minions. It wouldn't be that hard to get like +3 on this card. But Tar Creeper kind of already has enough health, and on the opponent's turn, since it has 3 attack, they get punished for trying to trade into it over multiple turns, which seems like it would be pretty easy against the Crypt Lord. I don't think you really play this in anything other than a Token Druid deck, because it seems like it would probably be a little bit difficult to get extra health on this card outside of that deck, and with only 1 power, you really want to buff its attack with something like Mark of the Lotus or Power of the Wild, so it's a little bit difficult for me to imagine this seeing play anywhere else. And I feel like the deck that it might see play in, it's just kind of maybe outclassed by Tar Creeper, and if it is better than Tar Creeper, it's like just barely better. So maybe it slots into the Tar Creeper spot in Aggro Druid. Webweave. Apparently this card was broken at 4 mana, so they had to make it cost 5. At 5, I really can't see this card being very competitive. I've seen people say, like, at worst it forces an AoE, and goes 1 for 1 with it, but if my opponent has 2 1/2 poisonous spiders on their side of the board, that's 2 damage a turn. I'm fine with just not doing anything. And then when they commit a threat, then that's when I can commit my Consecration or whatever. I get to deal with this card and hit their actual threat. This card also gets pretty wrecked by just small minions, and there are a lot of aggro decks running around. I really don't mind Flame Tongue toteming my healing totem and sending it into a poisonous spider. Maelstrom Portal helps deal with these things. Southsea Deckhand, upgraded Rusty Hooks. Control is just going to AoE them while also hitting your other stuff. Even aggro can kill them efficiently, or if you're playing this on turn 5, aggro is just going to kill you, so seems like this card kinda sucks. I'm even a little bit skeptical that this card was really good at 4 mana, but I'm pretty confident it's bad at 5. Gnash. So this card is like Bite. It's also kind of similar to the warrior card Bash. I'm actually pretty impressed that they were able to find something that rhymes with Bash and also fits the like Bite and Claw theme. So that's cool, I guess. So it's obviously just a scaled down Bite, but one of the reasons that Bite kinda sucks is because it's 4 mana deal 4 damage in a class that has Swipe. So maybe if you scale the card down, it makes a little bit more sense at 3 mana. At 3 mana though, it does compete with Feral Rage. Feral Rage can either gain you 1 more attack or 5 more armor. It also has synergy with Fandral, which is often pretty relevant, and this doesn't really do that. But a lot of times you only need to do 3 damage with Feral Rage, you wouldn't mind also getting 3 armor back out of the deal. Seems like it could be an okay card. I imagine as long as Feral Rage is in Standard, it probably won't see too much play. But Feral Rage is going to rotate out of Standard before Gnash does. I could see it seeing some play after that. It's an okay card. I'm not really sure if it fits anywhere currently though. Spreading Plague. It seems like it's probably going to be a little bit difficult to get a lot of value out of this card. Unlike Unleash the Hounds, you get less Scarabs the more minions you have on the board. So if you have 3 minions, they have 4 minions, you're only getting 1. So it's definitely going to be a little bit difficult to actually get the Scarabs. One thing this does have going for it though is pretty much the turn you play it, you're not going to die to aggro unless they have a weapon. But it's really good against like Bloodlust and Savage Roar stalling for a turn. It's kind of somewhere between Frost Nova and Blizzard where it's probably going to eat most of their damage, and it's also going to do a little bit of damage to each of their minions. A lot of Druid lists play Primordial Drake, so if this thing can do 1 damage to each of their minions and then you follow up with an Innervated Primordial Drake, that's like a 3 damage AoE, which is going to pretty effectively deal with most aggro boards. Also, there have been some Jade Druid lists that played the Pyromancer, Acolyte of Pain, and Mark of the Lotus combo. And Mark of the Lotus is really good with these 1/5 minions because at 1 power they don't really do much, but when you double their attack up to 2, and you even get that 1 extra point of health, they can do a lot more work. So if you are playing that kind of Jade Druid list or Ramp Druid list that plays that little package, then I can see Spreading Plague going up in value quite a bit. I kind of feel like this card on its own probably doesn't do enough, but if you can land a synergy with it, sometimes it's going to be pretty strong. I don't think you ever really want to play this in an aggro druid list, because even though it summons a bunch of tokens, which is good with your Mark of the Lotus and whatnot, you really just don't want to be behind in that deck. And if you're ahead, this card actually does nothing. Against some of the matchups that you're losing to, they're never going to have more minions than you anyway, so in some matchups in a deck like that, this is just going to be a dead card. I think this is a card for slow druids, and I think on its own it's not quite good enough, but you can find some synergy that makes this card seem more worthwhile. Now, Druid of the Swarm, this is a good card. So it can be a 2-mana 1/2 with Poisonous, which is kind of reminiscent of Stubborn Gastropod. This thing doesn't have Taunt in that form, which might actually be better, because a lot of the problem with Stubborn Gastropod is you just play it and they just kill it, but if you could actually hide that body behind a Taunt, then it's helpful to kind of target down something that you actually want to kill. Also, on turn 2, this is a 2-mana 1/5 Taunt Beast, which is actually pretty ridiculous. Silverback Patriarch is that, but 1 more mana and 1 less health. Not that Patriarch is a good card, but damn does this card look better than that. It's really good with Mark of Yasharaj, it's pretty good with Mark of the Lotus and Power of the Wild. I think this is definitely going to be a staple in the current iterations of aggro druid. It might even make its way into slower druid decks because this is just such a solid 2-drop. And then in late game, when you don't really want a 1/5 taunt, you just play it in the poisonous form and it kills a thing and they have to use removal on it. This card seems good. I think we're going to see a lot of Druid of the Swarm. So we have Bolster on a stick. Druid is getting a bunch of taunt synergies with like Spreading Plague. This could be pretty disgusting. That's a really expensive combo. At a 4-mana 2/3, you really need to be hitting at least 2 guys with this guy to get value. And it seems like it's going to be kind of hard to do that even with Druid's newfound taunt synergy. It is really good with Druid of the Swarm, which I expect to be in a lot of Druid decks, so maybe that's helpful to this guy. If you can somehow make an aggressive deck, or a deck that can have aggressive openers with a lot of taunt minions, playing this guy on curve could be absolutely devastating, but I don't think the card pool really supports that. Once you start getting into bigger taunts like Ancient of War and even Druid of the Claw, seems like this isn't really an effect that you care that much about having. I just don't really see where this guy fits. Don't really expect him to see too much play. Ultimate Infestation. This card does a lot. If you try to just break it down and see how much mana this card is worth, it ends up being worth like 18 mana. But the problem with that is you have to actually pay 10 mana for it in 1 turn. I would say at 10 mana this card is unplayable in every class other than Druid, but Druid's got some bullshit like Innervate and Wild Growth, so that does make this card a lot more viable in Druid, which I'm assuming is why Druid got the card. Like, yeah, it does a lot, it's worth a lot, but on turn 10 is dealing 5 damage and summoning a 5/5 really that good for the board? It is pretty good, it's like Firelands Portal. But at 10 mana, single targeting down something might not necessarily be what you want. If you compare this to something like Yogg-Saron, Yogg-Saron can help clear a board against an aggro deck or just a mid-range deck with a bunch of stuff on the board. But if the metagame is an environment where on turn 10 there's likely to be a mid-range thing on the board and you want to play a mid-range thing of your own, then this card is really, really good. Another issue I have with this card is like it draws 5 cards, and most Druid decks that could support this are already playing 2 Nourish. Do you cut Nourish for this? Probably not. Do you really want to be drawing that many cards in a game? 5 from this and 6 from your Nourishes? Probably not. I guess with Ultimate Infestation in your deck, it makes you feel better about nourishing for mana crystals, which is nice. But it seems like it might be a little bit difficult to justify the inclusion of this card. I've seen people say that you could maybe like cut Auctioneer and Jade Druid for this, but with the spells you're playing, Auctioneer is going to draw more than 5 cards, it's going to gain more than 5 armor, it's probably going to put like 15 worth of stats on the board, and it's going to deal more than 5 damage probably. So I don't think this card is better than Auctioneer and Jade Druid. The only place I can really see this seeing play is in Ramp Druid, and even in Ramp Druid you can really only justify so many 10-cost cards because they do take up your entire turn. Is this card better than Yogg-Saron? Is it better than Deathwing? Is it better than Yashiraj? Kinda remains to be seen. I don't think this will ever be a 2 of, but I could see maybe a 1 of this in a Ramp Druid deck. Also, this card is super sick with Astral Communion and Bright-Eyed Scout, so I'm definitely going to be playing that deck. Coin Innervate Ancestral Communion on turn 1, draw into Ultimate Infestation, kill whatever they played, heal up, play a thing of your own, draw 5 cards, and they get wrecked. This card might also be pretty cool in a Quest Druid. The 5/5 you get from this counts toward your Druid Quest. If you play this after you've played Barnabas, you're drawing 5 cards, and chances are like 3 or 4 of those are going to cost 0 mana, so you can just play them that turn. And you're probably playing taunts with that, you can single target down their biggest dude. You can gain a little bit of armor if you don't quite get enough taunts to support yourself. This card seems really good in Quest Druid, but I'm not sure it really solves any of Quest Druid's problems to make the deck competitive, but it does probably increase the power level of the deck somewhat, so interesting inclusion in Quest Druid. Fatespinner. This is kind of a weird card. It seems like it's usually going to be pretty obvious which Death Rattle you chose based on the board state. So would you play a 5-mana 5/3 with Death Rattle, deal 3 damage to all minions? Death Rattle AoEs have tended to not be very strong because your opponent can kind of decide when to trigger them, and usually they can do it in a position where it doesn't really do that much to their board. But that is a strong Death Rattle. 5-mana 5/3, give all your dudes +2/+2. I mean, if you're playing this in an aggro deck, it still dies to AoE itself. I'm actually not sure how this interacts with AoE. If they Flame Strike a bunch of 3 health things, does this save your other guys? Probably not, right? Because everything would have to die for this Death Rattle to trigger. I would imagine it probably doesn't work like that. If it does, it could be a pretty nice anti-AoE in an aggro deck, but I don't believe it works that way. So usually it's not really going to be a secret. It seems like, to me, neither half of this card is really that strong. But you can do some cute mind games with this card. If you're playing like a slower token druid that plays like Violet Teachers or whatever, you can just play this on turn 5 and secretly choose the +2/+2, and they might be expecting an AoE. And then turn 6 you go Violet Teacher, Innervate, bullshit, plus Mark of the Lotus, and then you have a bunch of really big dudes on your side of the board. Could be kind of cute. I can see some applications for the card. I just think it might be a little bit too weak, and I don't really know where it fits. At 5 mana in current aggro druid lists, you could be playing an 8/8. Or you could just be making a board of 2/2s instead of having to have a board to give +2/+2. So the Druid Legendary is a big fat dude that doesn't do anything the turn you play him, and has 7 health, but all the value comes out of its Death Rattle, and it's not a threat on its own. So I'm pretty sure this card sucks, because you're just going to play it, and they're going to ignore it, and they're going to kill you. Druid is getting some taunt synergies, and notably the Lich King is a really strong taunt minion in this expansion. But I feel like at 9 mana in Ramp Druid, you just have better options. Seems like this guy just gets ignored and you die. On 10 mana you can naturalize it. That might actually be worth it if you get 7 really significant taunt minions. But like, compare this to N'Zoth, he pulls back Death Rattles, and he also does it immediately. And if they try to Equality Consecrate your Death Rattle board, those Death Rattles are probably leaving something behind. Even if you get the Death Rattle out of this guy, you summon all your taunts. The opponent plays Brawl, and then all your taunts die. Just seems pretty weak to me. So the Druid Death Knight, he's probably the most boring of the Death Knights, but he seems pretty solid to me. Either Battlecry option is like kind of okay. You can get taunts if you're getting beat down, you can get poisonous if you want some board control. The hero power is pretty solid. Gaining +3 attack is going to help you clear out a lot of things. Gaining +3 armor is really going to help you survive. This doesn't really seem like the kind of Death Knight that you're building your deck around like a lot of the other ones, but it's just a pretty solid card on its own. It only costs 7, which is less than almost all the other Death Knights. To me, this seems more like a card that you just put in your Druid deck because you want a solid 7-drop, rather than building like a Death Knight Druid deck. Like maybe Ramp Druid just cuts an Ancient of War for this or something. Also, something to note, if Control Warrior and Jade Druid are in the meta, then Jade Druid can play this, and when Control Warrior plays Skulking Geist to kill all of their Jade idols, now the Druid just has a better armor up hero power than the Warrior, so you can still out-fatigue them. Feels bad, man. Well, feels bad, man, if you prefer the Warrior end of that matchup, which I do. But also, if you're playing this in Jade Druid, you're probably also playing a lot of card draw, so you're probably still hitting fatigue way faster. Maybe that's not a big deal. But you can also just use the attack to chunk away at their armor the whole time, and then they're going to be worse off in fatigue. I don't know if it's really worth the spot in Jade Druid. But basically, probably just a solid 7-drop for Ramp Druid. So Druid overall, they got some okay cards. They got some really powerful late-game cards, but I'm not really sure how many of them are actually worth playing. I think the rather unassuming 2-drop is probably by far the strongest card they got. But if Ramp Druid is still a thing, I kind of expect the Death Knight and Ultimate Infestation to also see play. Everything else seems maybe a little bit underwhelming. But Druid didn't really need the help, so that's fine. But a class that did need the help is Hunter. Hunter is currently the second worst class in Journey to Ungoro. It was the worst class in Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, so hopefully they get some good cards here. Bearshark is another Hunter 3-drop, so this card has to be better than Eagle Hornbow, has to be better than Animal Companion, Cloaked Huntress, even Carrion Grub. Wait, is Carrion Grub still in the game, or was that Grand Tournament? I don't know. But anyway, I kind of expect this card to be similar to Carrion Grub in some sense. It's in the 3-drop slot, and it's probably just not better than the other 3-drop options that Hunter has. 3 mana 4/3 can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. Like, yeah, that's pretty cool if you're playing against a mage. They can't Frostbolt this guy. But every mage deck right now plays Mana Worm, and Mana Worm itself beats your early game as a Hunter. So the Mana Worm's probably still going to be on the board on turn 3, and it's just going to trade into this. If you play this against a Warrior, they're just going to laugh in your face while they Fiery War Axe it and play a real minion. Paladin has Rallying Blade. Even other Hunters have Eagle Hornbow. Rogue got a new 3-power weapon. Shaman can just play Flame Tongue Totem and kill this with pretty much any little shitter. It just doesn't really seem like it's that hard to kill, even with the text. But if we live in an environment where there are a ton of mages and they don't play Mana Worm anymore for some reason, maybe if there are a bunch of rogues, maybe if AoE is just not that good, then I could see Bearshark seeing play. But overall, I think it's probably just going to be kind of an underwhelming 3-drop that may poke its head in here and there when the metagame calls for it. Stitch Tracker. So when I first saw this card, I thought it discovered a beast from your deck, but apparently it's any minion. And that's pretty dope, because you can play a deck that just plays Stitch Tracker and 2 minions that you want to discover. So you can bet your ass that I'm going to be playing Stitch Tracker, Yogg-Saron, and some other garbage in my deck. And I'm going to be trying to either chain Stitch Trackers, or just play like 3 Yogg-Sarons that game. And that's going to be dope. I always liked King's Outlook before it rotated because you could kind of do that, but man, this card just does it so much better. It's wonderful, I love it. I don't think this card really fits in any Hunter deck that we've seen before, at least a competitive Hunter deck that we've seen before. In a mid-range or an aggro Hunter, a 3-mana 2/2 just isn't good enough stats on the board, regardless of what it pulls from your deck. So I think this is going to need a new Hunter deck to go in, and I'm not sure that Hunter is really getting the tools for a new Hunter deck. But this is going to be an excellent meme card, and it might even be powerful enough to make a new archetype of Hunter. So because I love this card so much, I'm probably going to rate it too highly. But the card on its own is extremely good. I do think it's a little bit unlikely that it finds a home though. But damn, is this a good meme card. So we've got another one of these. I do think this is better than Feign Death. It costs half as much mana and it can only target one, but how often was Feign Death really ever targeting two? There's not really a whole lot to say about this card, other than it is pretty strong in a vacuum, but like what do you actually play it with? I feel like they really hyped up the Death Rattle theme of this expansion, but when you actually look at the Death Rattles available to play with this card, like what are you ever actually comboing this with? I'm not trying to get like 2 1/1s off my Rat Pack with this, that's just super underwhelming. I guess you can play it on your high main on turn 7, you get a 6/5 and 2 2/2s, but most of the time the opponent deals with high main by single targeting it down and then AoEing anyway, so those extra 2/2s might just be dying to whatever they were going to do anyway. Seems pretty underwhelming with pretty much every Death Rattle minion Hunter currently plays. This does increase the consistency of the Devilsaur Egg deck though, which is pretty dope. And between two of these, Princess Huhuron and Terror-Scale Stalker, maybe there is actually enough redundancy in that deck now to actually be a thing. It's kind of like Silence Priest. You pump in enough silence cards and enough things that want to be silenced and eventually it's going to be an okay deck. So maybe the Devilsaur Egg Twilight Summoner Hunter, you can even play N'Zoth with it. Maybe that's actually a thing now. Could be pretty fun with Playdead. But I don't even really see any other particularly interesting Death Rattle synergies with this card. So Venomstrike Trap is kind of similar to Bear Trap and Cat Trick. They take a garbage 3-mana beast, strap it onto a 2-mana secret, and see what happens. Bear Trap ended up not being that good, Cat Trick ended up being one of the best Hunter secrets, so where does this kind of fall? My issue with this card is it triggers when one of your minions is attacked, so the opponent is trading some of their stats into your dude, and then you get a poisonous minion, and if you're sending your poisonous minion into the thing that just traded into one of your dudes, the poisonous effect isn't really doing that much, because their 5/5 or whatever is probably only a 5/3 or a 5/2 now. It seems solid enough, there is a little bit of secret synergy in the set, maybe Cloaked Huntress makes a comeback, but it just kind of seems like an underwhelming secret on its own. So Corpse Widow looks like a really strong card, 5 mana 4/6 beast. Some versions of Midrange Hunter have played Stranglethorn Tiger as a 5 mana 5/5 beast, and 4/6 is probably a better stat line, especially if you're throwing a Houndmaster on it. It's easier for it to stick around for a kill command type synergy. 5 mana 4/6 beast is just pretty good in Hunter. And then you look at the text, your Death Rattles cost 2 less, and they can even be going down to 0. The thing is, as much as they talked about the Death Rattle cards in this set, I don't really feel like Hunter got that many tools to abuse this effect. But if you're playing some Death Rattles in your mid-range Hunter, this card is probably solid enough to just be put into the deck. Hunter has a lot of 5-drops, but they all kinda suck, and this is probably a step above any of those. So I think the most common use of this card is probably going to be you just play this on turn 5 with a 0-mana Kindly Grandmother. If you're playing this, then Fiery Bat probably makes its way back into mid-range and aggressive Hunter lists. You can play a Savannah High Main for 4 mana, but if you're doing that on turn 6, what are you doing with the other 2 mana? I guess you get a free hero power, that's kind of nice. You could play maybe an Infested Wolf with it or something. I really don't think the text on this card is that good, but I think the text is good enough to make a 5 mana 4/6 beast playable. And a 5 mana 4/6 beast might already be playable in Hunter. And if we get some crazy new Death Rattles, this card is insane. That's a 4 mana 2/1. The Death Rattle casts a Consecration, so I guess you play this on turn 5 with Play Dead to kill a living mana or something. And then you need to have a taunt on the board, I guess, and then if they make another board you can just trade this in, or you can play Terror-Scale Stalker on it or something. Keep triggering that Consecration every turn. But it's a 4 mana 2/1. And generally, Death Rattle AoEs are pretty weak because your opponent can just ignore it and go face for a turn. They can trade their stuff into your other stuff, they can trade into this. They can buff their dude so they don't even die to this with Mark of the Lotus or whatever. It just doesn't seem that good. It's a 4 mana 2/1. Abominable Bowman. So you can set things up so like High Main is the only beast you've had die this game or something. But this is a 7 mana 6/7 in Hunter. Midrange Hunter doesn't really want a 7-drop, and if they do, they would probably rather play Swamp King Dread instead of something slow like this. Most of the time they'd probably rather play a 5-drop and hero power. Control Hunter is not really a thing. I don't think this expansion makes it a thing, but this card is probably pretty solid in N'Zoth Hunter. I really just don't think Hunter has the tools to make a card like this work. Why are they giving Hunter slow, expensive cards? Toxic Arrow. So if you're using it as 2 mana deal 2 damage, that's not very efficient. If you're using it to give one of your guys poisonous, you can trade it into one of their guys, which is okay. But since the minion you're giving poisonous to has to have at least 3 health, or a Divine Shield I guess, that means you can't really trade tokens in. So a lot of times if you're trying to use it for that effect, you'd rather just play Hunter's Mark. 2 mana deal 2 damage isn't very efficient, so this card kinda seems like it sucks. Maybe you can play this with Argent Squire, that's probably the most efficient way to get use out of the poisonous. But it just seems like the straightforward usage of deal 2 damage is not going to be that good for 2 mana. You could just play Arcane Shot. And it seems too hard to really get use out of the poisonous side. It seems like a bad middle ground between Arcane Shot and Hunter's Mark. Maybe if Hunter got like a 1 mana 1/3 this would be playable, but definitely not right now. Professor Putricide. It's a 4 mana 5/4, so it can't be that bad. I feel like usually as a Hunter, if you have 6 mana, you'd rather be doing something other than Professor Putricide plus a secret. You can try to have your Cloaked Huntress live for a turn, but you'd probably rather just play your secrets the turn you play the Cloaked Huntress. This guy isn't a beast or anything, so he doesn't really have any synergy in that regard. Also, I believe you can only have 5 secrets in play at once. So you play a secret, get another one, you play a secret, get another one, and then you can't even really use this guy's effect anymore, even if you do have a Cloaked Huntress that's stuck on the board. Like, his stats are good enough that you don't mind playing him as a 4 mana 5/4, and he is kind of scary to leave on the board. But I feel like he just doesn't really do enough, doesn't really fit in any Hunter decks that we've seen before, and probably isn't powerful enough to make a new Hunter deck. So, yet again, kind of an underwhelming Hunter legendary. But he's really not that bad. It's just like, where do you actually play this guy? And how often are you going to get value out of him? He's like an okay card. If you want a, like, slower, mid-rangey secret hunter, I guess this guy could have a home in there, but I'm not sure the tools for that deck really exist. So Deathstalker Rexxar, you play this guy and you cast a 6 mana Consecration, but you also heal for 5. That's kind of okay. You give up your Hunter hero power to build a beast. The build a beast hero power can theoretically give you a bunch of value, but when you consider you're spending 2 mana for all those cards, all those beasts are going to be really overcosted. Like, if you combine your River Crocolisk and your Bearshark, you get a 7 mana 6/6 can't be targeted? Like, that's just not that impressive. I mean, you don't spend a card on it, so it's okay. But I feel like you're sinking a lot of mana into summoning what is essentially just a fat dude. And even with Consecration and Heal 5, I feel like Hunter just doesn't really have the tools to play the long game with a card like this. If you are trying to play the long game in Hunter, you're maybe just better off not even playing this card. Just play some high mains and an Azoth or something. Or you can just play a real Hunter deck and press Steady Shot and kill them to death. I mean, it'll probably be fun stitching together some random beasts, and maybe you can build something ridiculous. But my understanding is you can't have different minions with text combined together, so you're really just adding vanilla stats on top of something that has text. This doesn't even really seem that exciting, even as a fun card to me. I think this is probably the worst of all the Death Knights, and I think it's the worst by actually a pretty wide margin. So Hunter was the worst class in Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, the second worst class in Ungoro, and man, it does not look like Knights of the Frozen Throne did any favors for Rexxar. You get a handful of like Control Hunter cards, but none of them actually help Control Hunter become a thing. They're just like a card that if Control Hunter was a thing, maybe you'd put this in. But Control Hunter's not a thing, so you're not going to play Deathstalker Rexxar or Abominable Bowman. And then they gave him Exploding Bloatbat and Toxic Arrow. Like, what are these cards even? There's a handful of fine cards that might see play, but Hunter's so bad right now it doesn't need fine cards, it needs something good. Stitch Tracker is a really exciting card, not sure how competitive it'll be, but it can bring up some interesting decks. Corpse Widow is really the only Hunter card in this expansion that I think slots into an existing archetype and actually makes it stronger. I think Hunter got pretty shafted, honestly.